Good evening. This is the People's Platform. We all aspire for a life of joy, purpose, meaning, almost a magical existence of love, light, and dignity. However, due to a plethora of reasons, we at times find ourselves living under a cloud of psychological distress and ill-equipped to cope. In the face of adversity, how must we then cultivate our own joy, seek specialist help when needed, and cast aside societal stigma and truly awaken ourselves? Tonight, our topic of discussion is advocating for destigmatizing and prioritizing mental health. Our guests tonight are Dr. M. Ganesan, consultant psychiatrist. Good evening and welcome, Doctor.
Good evening.
Also, we have on board Dr. Suhashini Ratnatunga, consultant psychiatrist. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening.
My first question is to Dr. Ganesan. Doctor, when we talk about mental health in Sri Lanka, it's not really prioritized. Even if we take the budgetary allocation, the figures are extremely disturbing. Mental health, the budgetary allocation amounts to 1%, give or take, of the health budget. And the health budget, budgetary allocation is also quite abysmal. Talk to us about how this mental health system, plagued by poor funding, a scarcity of resources and experts, how it functions at a district level and at national level. Because in Colombo, we have the mental health hospital in Angoda that functions as the main sort of body dealing with mental health. However, if you go to Jaffna district, for example, there are 1 or 2 psychiatrists for the entirety of the district. So these figures are quite alarming. Speak to us about the mental health landscape broadly.
So, as you rightly said, when we say mental health, it's not just the disease we are talking about. It's overall sense of well-being, our capacity to cope with the day-to-day stresses, how we manage our emotions, how effective and active we are in society. All those things matter in mental health. So, when we talk about the mental health system, we are talking about prevention. We also talk about treating disorders. And also we talk about promoting mental health. Right? So, this is a very big area, and every citizen has a role to play in mental health. It's not just the psychiatrist or the mental health professionals alone. But when we talk about the Ministry of Health and its role in mental health, the primary role is diagnosing and treating the people suffering from mental health disorders. And so in 2005, we came up with the mental health policy, where our the unit of management of mental disorders, etc., will be on a basis of a district. So we plan that every district should have a small inpatient unit and a lot of outpatient services, and should offer a range of services. And to some extent, it has happened. Since 2005, we have moved a long way.
Right.
But still, yes, as you said, there are major discrepancies when we compare the districts. Some districts have fairly good quality of services, some don't. And the allocation is poor. And the services could be more kind of a client-oriented or patient-oriented and more supportive.
Right.
So there are issues.
Right. Dr. Suhashini, speak to us about how the community system works. So at the very top, you get the consultant psychiatrist. However, from there, there's a system that trickles down. The social worker. I don't know whether the government system has psychologists. What about the counselors? So talk to us about that whole system, and if a patient goes to a government hospital for, say, depression, anxiety, what happens? How does that system work? Very briefly.
Okay. I think Dr. Ganeshan very nicely put it. So mental health is not just about mental health, disorders. We also talk about mental well-being. The psychiatrist has a prominent role to play when it comes to mental health disorders, but we also look after other aspects, and we are very much concerned about the mental well-being of all our citizens. The psychiatrist takes the leadership role when it comes to treating mental health disorders, and we make decisions regarding the diagnosis of disorders and the treatment aspects. When the patient comes into hospital, the psychiatrist will look after the patient, but also it's a multidisciplinary team. Sure. So in order for the patient to get better, we need the contribution from a lot of other people as well. So the psychiatrist might take the leadership role, but we also need the support of the psychiatry nurses, the social workers, the occupational therapists. Mental health is very unique in the sense that mental disorders is not just the result of a biological phenomena that goes on in our bodies. There is a huge psychosocial contribution as well. So just prescribing medication alone will not treat or cure the patient. Right. That is why it's so important that we have a good multidisciplinary team. We look after the patients in hospital, but after discharge, it is imperative that the community system also is involved in the recovery process of the patient. Right. So what you're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to treating a patient in hospital. A lot of the treatment and the recovery process happens in the community. So in Sri Lanka, we have community psychiatry nurses, social workers, occupational therapists, psychologists who are also involved in taking over or handing over care of a particular patient. We are a very integrative society, so I'm happy to say something we don't see in most of the Western countries is that the families are very involved in taking responsibility of the patient and taking responsibility of other treatment aspects of the patient. So in that way, we are very lucky. So when I meet patients, a common conversation is also regarding the patient's treatment aspects with the family. So they are very much involved, and that is a very strong point in the recovery process of this patient. So in summary, yes, the psychiatrist plays a key role in the curative and the diagnosis aspect, but also there are lots of other key players in treating our patients, and that is the role they play in the community mainly.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Ganesan, speak to us about the treatment gap that exists. For example, we see, especially in Sri Lanka due to the lack of resources, we see how patients with very serious psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder being given treatment as a priority. However, patients with relatively minor conditions, their treatment goes sort of unnoticed almost, because we lack resources for counseling, for therapy, for cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that. So,
yeah, that's true, Sonali, because you see, there are many reasons for this treatment gap, especially for the common mental health disorders. As you rightly said, when it comes to the severe mental disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar, the treatment gap is very small. Right. Because people realize the behavior is odd, and because we have decentralized services, fairly good decentralized services, people have access to some mental health service reasonably close to their houses. Okay. But when it comes to common mental health disorders like depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and things like that, very often people don't realize that this is a problem. Families suffer, patients suffer, because their knowledge that, hey, this is a problem, this is a mental health issue, there is help for this, I can get it, is poor. And even when some young people do pick it up now, parents are very reluctant to bring them to hospital because of the stigma that we have. Oh my God, what will the society think if our son or daughter is seen as going to see a psychiatrist or going to a psychiatric clinic? So that is another barrier. And also, though we say our services are free at the point of delivery, accessing services, there are still issues. Okay. You know, traveling costs, and the lost earnings for the day, I mean, you can't go to the hospital and, go to the clinic and just see a doctor and come back like that.
Yeah.
Probably you have to go multiple times to get an appointment. You have to wait in queues. Probably half a day or one whole day is lost.
Right.
And so somebody, who is a day-to-day worker, and, can they lose that to take their child or parent or somebody to hospital? So there are other barriers that are also difficult to overcome. And then, yes, as you said, the multidisciplinary team members, there are psychiatrists, but how much time we can allocate for a patient. So our outpatients clinics have 100, 150 patients often coming. So the consultations are very short.
Okay.
Again, like occupational therapists, social workers, counselors, we don't have enough. A major problem we have is psychiatric nurses.
Okay.
Now in other countries, developed countries, and even in some developing countries, there are a group of nurses who are specially trained in psychiatry.
Right.
In Sri Lanka, we don't.
Right.
We have what are called general nurses who do 6 months in psychiatry ward and then the next 6 months maybe in the intensive care unit. So they are not really interested in learning or practicing or developing their skills, which is a major shortcome.
Right.
We have been trying very hard to kind of create this separate group of nurses who can do higher studies in mental health and who will work in mental health. And that would be a very valuable resource for us.
So, Doctor, this conversation has been going on for years and years. But I mean, it's a simple matter of formulating policy and implementing it, right?
Yes.
Okay. So political will is what is lacking, or?
Yes, because I think the decision making in Sri Lanka is very complicated. There are unions, there are powerful bodies. So, I mean, we psychiatrists have been advocating this for the last 15, 20 years to my knowledge, to have a separate group of nurses who would want to do psychiatry, who can be given additional training in psychiatry, and they can play a wonderful role.
Right.
Because when it comes to human resources, in Sri Lanka, we have about 100 psychiatrists now for the whole country, right? And that's not going to be very bigger in the near future. But when it comes to nurses, definitely, the human resource pool is much bigger.
Yeah.
We should be using them. And they are very intelligent, they are very clever, they can easily learn and do a lot of tasks, like you said, talked about CBT. I mean, they can be trained to deliver CBT because we are never going to have enough psychiatrists to deliver CBT and other psychotherapeutic interventions.
Dr. Suhashini, when scared young boys are told that to be emotional is to be weak, they become distant, avoidant, anxious men who are repressed and don't know how to express emotions. And we have so many of these hurt men walking around. Speak to us about this gendered aspect of mental health where macho men prefer to go to the gym rather than to a therapist, to a psychiatrist, to a psychologist. Speak to us about this gendered dynamic.
Okay, that's an interesting concept. So I think in Sri Lanka, this whole impression of if you're a man, you can't cry. If you're a man, even though you're having a bad day, you have to appear strong. To appear manly, you need to smoke a cigarette or you need to have a drink. You should take a glass of alcohol at a party. These are all labels we have given to men in society so that they appear strong or they appear more manly. The captain of the rugger team might appear more manly than a captain of the chess team because that exhibits a person's strength. I mean, that indirectly or directly translates to if a man cries, that is a weakness of his personality. If somebody has a bad day and doesn't appear to function normally, that is a weakness of his personality. A good way of coping is to have a drink or to physically verbally abuse somebody. So those are mainly ways of showing unhappiness. I mean, those are things that have been going on in our society. As a result, people with mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, they are not, this cohort of people are not accepted in society, in the sense that they are not recognized as probably a mental health condition. So people who are depressed will be irritable, people who are depressed will cry, but these are not recognized as mental health conditions because it is seen as a weakness of their personality. So as a result, there is, like Dr. Ganeshan said, when it comes to mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, people don't come forward because they are not recognized as mental health conditions.
Dr. Ganesan, I'd also like to hear your views on these patriarchal norms that are perpetuated, and as a result, there is these unresolved traumas that move from the parent to the child, and it's terrible to see how the little child also then tries to mirror the parent. Speak to us about how we can, as a society, sort of work on this aspect. Is it, I mean, do we have to do awareness campaigns like for Laduru, or I don't know, where should it start? Is it the education system?
We have a lot of work to do on that area, because unfortunately, as a society, we are stuck in a paradigm that's very proud of our ancient achievements, and culturally also, we are stuck in a time frame that's not really here now. Yes, in some urban areas it's different, but if you take Sri Lanka overall, what you are saying is very true. And the change has to happen from homes first. You know, usually a girl child is given a doll, a boy child is given a gun. Right? The boy child is allowed to go and play outside with his friends, a girl child is not. So unfortunately, we start showing these discriminations, and which also puts, like you said, additional pressure on everybody. The boy child who doesn't want to go out and play and who wants to play chess, it's the parents see there's something wrong with the guy, and they will pressurize, right? And then we have our schools, segregated schools, and again promoting the sort of systems where girl children are put through a different system, where there is coercion, very regimented, etc. The boys are allowed to have some more freedom, but at the same time, certain behaviors are expected. So for somebody to express themselves freely, beyond this kind of a gendered norms, it's very difficult in Sri Lankan society. There's a huge amount of pressure from schools, from parents, from families, and overall the society itself.
Yeah, and that ties into the shame and guilt and the people-pleasing behavior.
Absolutely.
as adults, and the meaningless conformist nature.
Yes. And also, unfortunately, it also translates into more violence. For example, when we take domestic violence, right? Violence against children, parents beating up their children, or parents telling nasty things to their children. You know, how close are our children to their fathers in Sri Lanka? Very often, father is seen as a distant figure, and their children find it difficult to engage, and the fathers also find it difficult to engage because they have not seen it when they were growing up as kids.
So they lack empathy, loving kindness.
Absolutely. And this translates into alcohol abuse, physical violence, domestic violence, and a whole heap of other problems when they come and face as adults, which is very difficult to manage at that point. And schools can play and should play a major role. Because unfortunately our schools are about memorizing, preparing for exams, not creating good citizens. Or individuals who can decide for themselves, and individuals with good self-esteem, with courage. We don't. And that's a shame.
Dr. Suhashini, before we go in for a short commercial break, speak to us about, in terms of your own experiences, there are a lot of, we commonly hear of depression, anxiety, but of late, we also read about incidents of body dysmorphia, issues faced by LGBTQI plus communities, drug-induced anxiety, manic episodes due to drug abuse. Talk to us about all of these other areas, patients from suffering from these aspects as well.
Okay, so depression still is one of the leading causes of suicide in Sri Lanka, and the prevalence of depression in Sri Lanka is about 4.5%. So this is equivalent to most of the other countries in the region. There has been a lot of talk about depression, and people are now seeking treatment for depression. It's not perfect, but it's much better. And we see that being translated to our suicide rates coming down now. So since 2005, the rates have come down to about 14 per 100,000. So that's, I mean, it's not great, but again, it's an improvement from where we were. We also commonly see other mental health disorders like anxiety disorders, drug-related problems. All this is seen in the community. Again, I think the mental health literacy in our country has improved over the past few decades, and there's a lot of talk about mental health in schools. So teachers are now more aware of children, so more children are now being referred to child psychiatrists with learning disabilities, attention deficit problems. So that is a very good trend we are seeing in Sri Lanka, because earlier a child who was lagging behind or a child who was a nuisance in class would be punished or won't be promoted to the next class. But now we are seeing a nice, a lot of students being referred to a psychiatrist or for mental health evaluation. So that is a good trend we are seeing. But again, like what Dr. Ganeshan was saying, there is a lot of pressure, academic pressure in schools, from the Year 5 scholarship to O-levels, A-levels, students wanting to get into more popular schools. So this creates a lot of pressure. And then, I mean, automatically the child is exposed to a lot of stress-related disorders like depression and anxiety.
Yeah. The inability to take failure, to accept failure, for example.
Absolutely. I mean, our focus is the curriculum, and our curriculum is basically about, again, checking rote memory of students. We don't focus on building interpersonal relationships, interpersonal skills, analytical thinking, creative thinking, expressing kindness, empathy. I mean, these are fantastic aspects that are, I mean, they are addressed in other countries, and that shows that these children grow up, you know, with a huge skill set. Not just, you know, I want to be a doctor when I grow up. So as a result, these kids are, you know, having a lot of mental health issues, and we see them as children coming with depression, anxiety, and also substance-related problems. Because they get into one way of coping is probably taking substances to de-stress themselves. I mean, we know parents who, close to the exams, give drugs taken from pharmacies to manage the anxiety of the child or to improve concentration in children.
Self-harm.
And also self-harm.
Engage in self-harm.
Yes, that's another trend we are seeing. We are seeing a trend, a receding trend in suicide, but we are also seeing an upwards trend or an increasing trend of deliberate self-harm in Sri Lanka. So that is an interesting finding in epidemiological data.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and also I think teachers have such a pivotal role to sort of guide children and give them the love that they seek, right?
Absolutely.
And that's not happening in terms of teacher training.
Because teachers are also under pressure to cover the curriculum. So they are evaluated on how much syllabus have they covered, and it's unfortunate that we are, as you rightly said, you know, we are just checking rote memory and nice handwriting. And we think that itself is enough to create people who are resilient, who are capable of thinking for themselves and have critical thinking, creative thinking. It's not. And it's a missed opportunity because almost all our children go to school. We have a fantastic base to build up from. Unfortunately, we are stuck there.
I'd like to focus on solutions when we come back after this short commercial break. Stay with us.
COVID-19 සඳහා ආරක්ෂිත පියවර නිතරම හොඳින් සබන් යොදා දෑත් සෝදන්න. සබන් හෝ විසබීජනාශක මධ්‍යසාරයක් භාවිතා කර දෑත් පිරිසිදු කරන්න. සැම විටම අන් අය සමග මීටරයක දුරස්ථභාවයක් පවත්වා ගන්න. හැකි සෑම විටම නිවසේ රැඳී සිටින්න. නිරතුරුවම නිවැරදිව මුඛාවරණ පළඳින්න.
We must be prepared to face any challenge.
There is no quick fix, but we have to go for a solid fix.
Where do you think the Central Bank of Sri Lanka is heading right now?
Coming out of the ashes, like a phoenix, we will rise. People are fighting for daily survival.
We have to restructure our debt, there is no doubt about it.
I rather try at my best, sitting with the enemy, trying to sort this out.
IMF is not the destination.
We've heard a lot of political parties over the years over-promising and under-delivering.
Face the Nation every Monday at 9:30 p.m. on TV1.
අපිට උනේ ගෞරවනීයත්වයේ නැතිවීමද එහෙම නැත්නම් අපිට බැරි හින්දා තවත් කෙනෙක් අපිව පාලනය කරනවා.
ඇල්ජීරියාවෙන් ප්‍රංශකාරයෝ ගියාට වැඩක් නැහැ කිව්වා. මොකද හේතුව ප්‍රංශ සංස්කෘතිය, ප්‍රංශ දේශපාලනය තනිකරම තියෙන කියලානේ ඇල්ජීරියාවේ. අපිටත් උනේ ඒකම.
දැන් මේ ලෝක බෙදලා ඉවර දෙකට. ඒ දෙකට කියන්නේ මේ යුක්‍රේනය හා රුසියාවත් එක්ක තමයි බෙදලා තියෙන්නේ. යුක්‍රේනය ආක්‍රමණය
අද ඔය නැවතත් කියනවා මේක යුක්‍රේනය හා රුසියාවද ප්‍රශ්න
නෙමෙයි. ඒක තමයි ප්‍රශ්නේ පේන්නේ. ප්‍රශ්නේ ස්වරූපය එකයි. ප්‍රශ්නේ මූලයන් තියෙන වෙන තැන.
ඒ සම්පත් තියෙනවා. අපිට ඉස්සරහට
යන්න බෑ. හරියට හරි. ජාත්‍යන්තර වෙළඳපොළ ටාගට් කරනවා නම් එතන තියෙන්නේ gain of trade. භාණ්ඩයක් හරි සයවාවක් හරි විකුණලා ලබා ගන්න පුළුවන් වාසිය ඉහළ වෙන්න ඕන.
මම ඉතින් දේශපාලනඥයෙකුත් නෙවෙයි ආර්ථික විද්‍යාඥයෙකුත් නෙවෙයි.
හැබැයි දේශපාලනඥයෝ හොඳින් දන්නවා.
දේශපාලනඥයෝ
වැඩ කරේ කොහොමද කියලා.
හුඟක් හොඳට දන්නවා. ජනාධිපතිවරු 7 දිනත් එක්කම වැඩ කරපු එකම මිනිස්සයා මම හිතන්නේ රාජ්‍යස්කේ හිටපු.
Welcome back. We are in conversation with Dr. M. Ganesan and Dr. Suhashini Ratnatunga, consultant psychiatrist. Before moving to the solutions proposed by our guests, I'd like to quote a poem I came across when doing my research. It's called Depression by Alison Pick. I come by it honestly, an heirloom passed from my father and grandmother before me. In the bed by the window, she stares at the ceiling, pills untouched on the dresser. Cancer uncurls in her brain. She says she feels nothing. The heavy deadness which also weighs me down. Don't worry, love. Depression comes and then goes. Soon it will be over. She says this to me and to herself. Dr. Ganesan, mental illness is such a serious burden on the patient who goes through it. When we have a physical ailment or a wound, we treat it. But when we have a mental ailment, we are so reluctant, we are so afraid, we are so ashamed to seek care. Living in Sri Lanka, how must we make this paradigm shift whereby patients feel comfortable and safe to seek expert care?
So one thing, as Dr. Suhasini said, literacy. they got to know, hey, there's something wrong with me, I'm a little different now. Is it depression? Am I having anxiety? Why am I feeling different? Right? Am I shouting a little more than before? Or somebody says, hey, you are different now. Do I take notice of it? What is it? Do some research, talk to somebody. Right? So literacy is very important. Right? And then access to services. How respectful the services are. How accepting the services are. Because you see, even when I have a dental issue, I know I have to go to the dentist, but I'm so reluctant because the experience is not that fantastic. No, my dentist is good still, right? Because there are push factors and pull factors. So our services has to be very inviting. People should be free to come and talk, say anything where they are accepted. And I'm not just talking about the psychiatrist. As Suhasini said, it's the whole system. Yeah. The nurses, the social workers, the counselors, the doctor in the OPD, doctor in the clinic, every body should be respectful. Yeah. Some people need to be treated with respect. And unfortunately, I don't think we have achieved that yet. Right? Anybody going to hospital, how are we treated? Are you treated as a valuable citizen of this country, or people shout at you? So that creates a fear, and that makes people stay out. How much of privacy do we have? Right. How much can a patient or a client talk to a doctor where they are sure that nobody else is listening to? Unfortunately, our clinics are so crowded, right? And that's very difficult to achieve. Okay. It may not be that important for physical ailments. It is important for that, but in mental health especially, when somebody want to talk about their issues with their sexual preference or something that they don't want others to listen to, right? And are we able to offer that sort of environment for our clients? Unfortunately, still that's not widespread, right? And then follow-up of care. How they are seen again, getting another appointment, coming and seeing, that continuity of care is also a challenge in our system. So one doctor may be seeing you today, another doctor may see you another day, right? So that continuity of care is a problem. Right. So these are some of the major issues that we have.
Doctor, if we take the mental health care system and the policymakers, there can't be a gap. So whatever that is lacking in the mental health care system must be rectified by the people's representatives who represent us in Parliament. However, if there's a gap, then that needs to be rectified. How do you view this?
Yes, that is a major issue, right? So psychiatrists as a group has been advocating, has been talking about this, has been demanding in many fora, many places. Sure. But being government servants ourselves, the influence we can bring about is quite limited.
How must this influence be brought now?
Yes, the influence must come from the people themselves.
So the patients need to advocate for it?
Health is a right.
Of course.
Right? And it's the state's responsibility to provide that help. Yeah. And people should realize, hey, I have depression, right? The state has a responsibility to offer this to me. Yeah. What is the service I'm getting? So the people should ask, they should organize themselves into groups, they should demand, they should ask, this is the service what we want. Why is this area not having services? Unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, we are not finding people because of stigma, because of various reasons. That demand for better services, demand for a holistic services, not really coming. You see that in developed countries like UK, Australia, USA, there are organizations, grassroots organizations, which again, like at national level organizations, that demand, that kind of quantify the issues in services, finds the gap in the services and demands for it. Even in India, we see that quite a lot. But unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, people are willing to sit back and accept whatever they are getting, even when it is subpar. We can do a better job.
Right. Dr. Suhasini, body-mind regulation, dysregulation, very quickly for the benefit of our viewers. there's a saying that human beings are like walking projectors, projecting their internal world externally. Something that most of us are not aware of doing is we don't take responsibility for our own wounding. So if we have inner child wounds that we have not resolved, as adults we tend to sort of project it onto the other person. How important is it for us as individuals to learn about how to cope with a panic attack? If you're having an anxiety attack, these are the things you need to do. If you're being unreasonable to a certain person, or if you feel like you're projecting your own insecurities and fears onto society, you need to be conscious of it. So that consciousness is lacking in society by and large.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was actually going through the Australian curriculum recently, and I was fascinated to find the things that are taught to children when they are around 9-10 years of age. While we focus on mathematics and memorizing how many, concentrating on rote memory, there the child is taught about how to deal with puberty, how to deal with, how to talk about sex with your partner, how to deal with an angry friend, or what am I going to do when my best friend is diagnosed with a terminal illness. So that is what we call, that is basically mental health literacy. You need to be aware of mental health conditions, and it is only through awareness will you realize that, okay, I have a problem and I need to get help, and these are the resources available, and these are the people or the places I can turn to get help.
Right.
The biggest problem we have here is people are unaware that they're suffering from a particular condition.
Sure.
Right, and I think as a society we have that responsibility to teach our children what are common mental health conditions, what are the things that will make you more resilient, what are the things that will improve your interpersonal skills, what are the things that will improve improve social relationships, how do I negotiate, how do I become more assertive. So basically awareness at a school level, right, where teachers educate children or expose children to mental health related conditions will be a good stepping stone.
Super. My final question to Dr. Ganesan. The Sri Lankans are called a traumatized nation because of the decade-long ethno-religious, ethno-linguistic conflict that we underwent. Prior to that, we had several insurrections, tragic history which we haven't as a society come to terms with, grappled with. We haven't had a cogent system of transitional justice. Speak to us about this intergenerational trauma that still lingers amongst us, those who have gone through these pains, these bloody wars and conflicts.
Yes, so that's a huge area. That's like the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
We don't talk about.
Yeah.
Right? Unfortunately, hardly anybody is interested to even see that as an issue.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it affects our lives, affects the situation in the country almost on a daily basis.
Of course.
Right? So as you said, problems have been there since independence. After a few years, we have had problems, right? One or two natural ones and man-made suffering. And suffering does leaves wounds in our minds that needs dealing with. Right? I mean, just like, childhood sexual abuse or childhood physical abuse, how it leaves permanent scars in our minds and how we behave, how we react, how we cope. These also leave permanent scars. And rightly you said, they do get transmitted from one generation to another. We know that. There's enough literature worldwide that this is so. But unfortunately, we are living in a state of denial, and somehow it'll all come right. Somehow it'll kind of go away. It's not. And we see the amount of alcohol consumption, deliberate self-harm, suicides, societal violence, domestic violence. I mean, we see that on a day-to-day basis. Right? Yeah. So we can do something for that, right? For that, we need to open up as a society and accept, hey, we have a problem here. Just like how we say somebody having anxiety, somebody having depression, that they detect, hey, I'm different. There's something happening to me. I need help. The society needs help here. And the society has to wake up out of this secrecy, out of this, closing the cupboards and opening them up and, hey, this is the problem we have. Come on, let us sort it out. And Sri Lanka is not the only country to go through things like this. And it has happened before. And some countries have taken steps to overcome it. I mean, simple examples, like Ireland had problems for much longer than us. Right? And they dealt with it. I mean, the policymakers, the government, the citizens of the country say, hey, this is a problem. We need to resolve this. Unfortunately, we think somehow our problems will kind of disappear if we ignore them.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's not going to happen.
All right. Final closing remarks in a few sentences, Doctor, before we go.
Yes, so mental health is something very important, and just mental health professionals alone can't do much. We all need our mental health to be improved. So parents, teachers, neighbors, society, let us think about mental health. When we talk to somebody, when we interact with somebody, watch our words. Be careful how we deal. Are we hurting somebody? Are we causing pain? Or are we saying something that's going to help that person? So we all need to work towards better mental health for the sake of the nation.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. M. Ganesan and Dr. Suhashini Ratnatunga. Thank you for being a part of this show. And thank you for watching us. We'll see you again on Monday with the Sinhala edition of the People's Platform. Have a safe weekend. Good night.